That should be recording. Okay. Perfect. And welcome everyone to our ACG committee meeting. We're going to have our call to order. We know who we have here, so we're good. And then any public comments? No public comments. That usually means we're not doing anything to get ourselves in trouble. And then the first resolution is for the meeting minutes of our last committee meeting, which was January 17th, 2023. Could we get a motion to approve those minutes?
It's Matt, so moved.
Lonnie, second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Abstained? Perfect. All right, moving forward, I'm going to hand this over to Joe Bonanata. Many of you might have known Joe. Joe's been with the organization 8 years. Am I correct in that?
11 years this year.
11 years. Oh, and you know, we have him in a new role in charge of our HR and basically and HR plus everything. So we review obviously our governance documents on an annual basis, typically in the fall. But we did have some employee handbook revisions that we thought it probably makes sense to move before September. And so we wanted to bring it for the ACG committee to get your review before we bring it to the board. And Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. Joe Bonanata, Senior Manager of Operations, the Green Bank. Good to see everyone. So like Brian mentioned, we are recommending a few edits to the employee handbook for this year. The last time we went through this process was in October of 2021. So we're due for a bit of a cleanup. The revisions are broken out into kind of two categories. The first are some more straightforward wording changes, and then on the next slide you'll see some slight changes to a few of our policies and procedures. So with regards to wording, we are cleaning up any reference of CGB and replacing that to Green Bank to align with our brand guidelines. We're also replacing all references throughout the document where we refer to a specific person as either he or she with they or their. We are in the middle of a year-long and possibly longer agreement with a DEI consultant, or we're calling it Be Ready consultant, which is belonging, racial equity, access, diversity, and inclusion. And so that's a result of our work with them to create for a more inclusive workplace and document. And then lastly, there's reference to just president throughout the handbook, and so we're replacing that with president and CEO to reflect the correct position title. Next slide, please. So now on this slide, this will talk about a few of the policies and procedures that we are recommending edits to. And so the first is just the handbook references procedures for an employee submitting an expense report or requesting time off that had previously been a manual process, either through email or just conversation with their supervisor. That's all been automated over the last 2 years through our SharePoint site. And so the handbook is being updated to reflect that automated process. We are also, per Public Act 22-128, adding Juneteenth as our 13th company holiday. So the handbook is being revised to reflect that. And then on our educational assistance policy, so that was approved by this committee and by the board a few years ago, and it had previously capped, so there was always a $10,000 per employee per calendar year maximum in terms of education tuition reimbursement. What we're doing is recommending removing the cost per credit hour cap. So we had previously capped it at $400 per credit taken for undergraduate courses and $750 per credit for graduate courses. But to give us some flexibility, we're recommending removing that per credit hour cap and just keeping it at $10,000 per employee. For reference, the University of Connecticut's graduate program is at $1,050 per credit hour. So there's employees that were going through various programs and having to cover the balance themselves. And so we are just recommending that that removing that cap.
Why don't we just raise the cap?
So that's a possibility. I mean, the programs are kind of go across the board. We've seen a lot of folks over the last few years go through the Yale Clean Energy financing certificate program, and that isn't a cost per credit hour, but it's a flat rate. And so we were just thinking
What's
about
the flat rate?
Eric, are you on the line? I think it's
Yeah,
9,000.
yeah, it's about $9,000 and change.
Why do we specifically? I mean, my question here is, and we don't have the full policy in front of us, right? The educational assistance policy, does it point out that these, whatever we're giving educational assistance on, has to relate to your job function?
It leaves that judgment up to the manager and to the VP of operations to make sure that there's alignment.
So when it says it leaves it up to that, is it stated in the policy or no?
I need to look at it. I don't have it in front of me myself.
And do we want to take the direction to investigate that? And if it is not clear in the handbook, that we add that revision for the board for
Yeah, I mean that's Tom personal. I don't speak for the body here, but I'm all for educational assistance, but I think it needs to be as part of your job function, and B, with the exception of something very specific like the Yale program where it doesn't give you credit hours, but it directly relates or we find benefit for the organization of these people having that certificate. $9,000 in that regard is fine. But it seems to me that the rest of it is just too open-ended to say if somebody deems it appropriate, and I make this up, guys. I don't, somebody could go take a wine tasting course for $9,000 and charge it through, right? And if somebody said, oh yeah, that makes sense, it's educational assistance, you could put it through. I just think we need to tighten it up a little bit.
Sure. So the exact line in the current policy is for tuition assistance, management will consider the relevance of the program to the employee's current position, job responsibilities, and promotional path prior to approval of the tuition assistance request.
Yeah, I would like to know who's defined as management, and I'd like to nail that down. And I have a problem with just removing the cap outright. If you want to call out the program at Yale, maybe you do that or something like that.
If I could jump in, I kind of agree with Tom a little bit on this. Again, I think I certainly support the policy. We had a long discussion about it. I can't remember exactly this. I think a lot of the changes were prompted by some different IRS treatment that allowed us to give this as a benefit, maybe pre-tax. So it's I think it's a huge, nice benefit, but it does seem a little open-ended. My two questions would be also if we've looked at, and you could give us, just so we are being responsible, an estimate of what the impact of this might be. Like you said, currently under the policy, some employees are having to come out of pocket because our cap is too low. So if we change the cap, do we have sort of a sense of how big the spend will be? Not that we wouldn't want to do it, but just so we've asked the question. And two, maybe we could have something that sets a cap that's based on, as sort of a baseline based on either UConn or what we think is reasonable, but then give management the ability to approve things like other courses that aren't credit, but that are clearly job related. But that way, at least in there's some guideline about what a credit should be worth. And then there's discretion to approve things that don't line up with the policy. It's not, those people aren't frozen out. That's one thought on how to handle it.
I agree with that completely. Yeah.
I think it's, this is Lonnie, I think it's good to kind of get this before it goes before the full board, because the costs, and we know that's been battling around at the, in the legislature this session, how much things cost and how much UConn costs, and, how much everybody's getting paid, and, blah, blah, blah. So just to kind of have our arms wrapped around every possible question, I think is a good idea.
Sure. Yep.
And
thank you
and
for
that
all
could be
Heather.
balanced with the benefits, of course, like we're getting huge value when people take their personal time to get more training. We get that. But as Lonnie's pointing out, sometimes, we just have to have asked the question.
And by the way, this is very consistent with what I'm seeing a lot of companies do within their own, private and public companies do within their own guidelines for employee reimbursement per items. It's the same thing with your next one, kind of your employee benefit for gym membership. Now I will argue I haven't gone and see page 44, so I haven't done that. But I don't know whether that's limited to a certain amount per month. But that's another thing I've seen.
So, with regard, well, I can come back to the gym membership in a minute. I think all of your suggestions are very helpful on the tuition reimbursement. In terms of ultimate cost, we can put something together. I don't think there's going to be a huge impact for the Green Bank. Just I don't think that there are very many reimbursements that we've seen that have been causing people to come hugely out of pocket. I think this is just something that we're cognizant of going forward, and a lot of that's just based on number of credit hours that people typically have been taking, that they'll hit their max per year, but there are situations where they may or may not, and that's due to the per credit hour limit. So I'm happy to approach that with an index to UConn, as long as we give management the ability to reimburse around that based off of job relevance. And Tom, per your suggestion, I'll make sure we fully define management.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe why don't we
And the gym membership is $30 a month, Tom. I just happen to be looking at it.
Thanks. Perfect. That's good then. I'm good with that.
And
my own opinion.
In case you have questions on cost, the Hartford office, a gym is included for the most part in our membership, or I'm sorry, in our lease. And so this is really just to impact and give a benefit to those based in Stanford.
By the way, just in terms of Lonnie's comment, let's just assume we're always interested in cost.
Fair enough.
Joe, you want to explain the last bullet regarding wiping of cell phones?
Yeah, absolutely. So the last point is just a clarification that was recommended by our IT consultants, AdNet Technologies, which is just clarifying that upon an employee's departure from the Green Bank, that Green Bank management and AdNet, or our IT consultants, can remotely terminate mobile access and associated data. So that's things like the email, the Teams telephone that we use, and that the Green Bank would have the ability to restore that device back to its factory settings.
Let me ask a question there. Do we provide the devices or their own personal devices?
These are personal devices.
I have a problem then with the Green Banks being able to restore it to its factory settings. I just because it's their own personal device. I definitely think you're absolutely appropriate to be able to wipe all the Green Bank email off there, if Green Bank Teams and whatever else applications related to the Green Bank. But to say you're going to have the ability to restore somebody's entire device to factory settings concerns me just a little bit.
So I totally agree with you, Tom. This was the language that was suggested by AdNet, and from my understanding of it, this is not the intended outcome, of wiping a device.
Right.
Just kind of a last ditch result. If anybody is using their own personal phone, they should have a backup they can restore from. When they would restore from that backup, what this means is the data within the app. So the actual Green Bank and email within an Outlook app would not be there. So they
No,
would be able to get back to where they were.
Well, then I think that's what we should say. Again, I'll just go back to, if we're asking people to use their personal devices, let's put it this way: if I was paying attention, you were asking me to sign this, I'd say no. Go buy me a device.
Yeah, I think Tom's right. I think we could just, instead of saying restore the device back to its factory settings, we say something along the lines of like restore the Green Bank related apps. We could play with the
Right.
language, but I think that is, I think, the intent. And we go that route.
Okay.
So then I would suggest, if the committee members are okay with it, that we add to this resolve, when it says approve the revisions of the Green Bank presented on May 16th, 2023, and we add something with further clarification as instructed by the committee members as it relates to the education employment policy. And then we can leave off, I wouldn't put in the resolution, but for us, that's going to be the total cost. And then, what is management? And then the resolution would continue, and clarification of how a mobile device would be restored back to its factory settings related to Green Bank supplied technologies and apps, and then we could take it from there, something like that, if that's okay. So I'd want to.
This is Tom. I'm fine with that. I think on the educational one, did you oversimplify that a little bit, Brian? I thought Matt had a little bit more in his commentary, which I agreed with. I thought he was more eloquent than me, related to the educational side. I thought there was a little bit more than what you noted there, but in general, basically revise the educational reimbursement and then change the factory setting language related to the mobile phones.
Okay.
That'd be my,
So I think I've got the cost, the management, and then what was the third one on the education assistance policy? Maybe I'll ask Matt or Joe or Eric.
I thought it was something related to the credit hours, the cost per credit hours, and
Yeah,
and
that,
also go ahead, Matt.
I think hopefully I am hitting the part you agree with, Tom, but I think I was just saying that we should keep a credit hour cap. You can tie it to UConn or tie it to whatever benchmark you want. And then if something's beyond the cap, then it would have sort of a management level, whatever you guys think is appropriate, safety valve where they could have discretion to approve it. So programs like Yale or other programs and even wine tasting could get approved, but it would require someone to really actually say, okay, I've looked at it and it really is in furtherance of their job duties.
Okay, so we'll total costs, implement a cap, and define management would be the instructions that we would take to the board based on the direction from the ACG committee members. And then maybe we'll just keep the resolution broad and say clarify and update the education assistance policy and the ability to restore devices back to its factory setting. Maybe we'll leave it broad in the resolution, but then we know our marching orders for the board meeting. And if we screw that up, you could say at the board meeting, no, guys, and slap our hands, but we'll get it right, I promise.
Yeah, and could I also comment on one more item? The his, her / theirs I fully support this. I know this is a sensitive topic, but could we, I've been looking through it this morning quickly. Is there a way to, and I know we're getting a DEI consultant who maybe can help us with this. Is there a way to go through and maybe alternate or look at also the grammatical portion of this? So when we're talking about it in the same sentence, an employee, maybe the second reference, instead of being he, she, their, or any pronoun, can just be the employee to keep it grammatically correct, or where we have there that works, we can use there. But I mean, in other words, looking through it, it looks like we could alternate or make this read better if we used a combination of their or the employee in its place. I don't feel terribly strongly about the need to do that, but I just thought if we have time between now and the meeting, maybe somebody could go through and see if that works equally well, and just in terms of readability. So I like I said, I don't want to hold it up, but just in reading it, there are a couple of spots where it seems like the employee would work just as well as there.
You want to take that on, Joe?
Definitely. I'm all about making that document more readable.
Yeah.
So.
And also, I think I mentioned Brian Garcia to you, and maybe Brian Farnan. There are some certification standards out there that if we're getting a consultant, maybe just to look at, like I know I mentioned Shipman is Mansfield certified. So to the extent it's something we want to look at, I don't know if there's a cost element, but I just mentioned it.
Okay, we'll investigate that.
Okay.
All right, so maybe the cleanup on the employee, maybe we leave that one out of the resolution, but we'll do it. I think it's right. And I think we're all trying to figure out how to properly say, we're all learning. Okay, and then we will add to the end of the resolve to revise the education assistance policy and the language related to the restoring the device back to its factory settings. If we could just add that to the end of the resolution and get that moved, we'll take the direction to clean these things up as directed.
Would you like a motion?
Yes, please.
I move adoption of the resolution as modified per Brian's verbal modification there.
I second.
Those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Those against? Abstain? Excellent. Thank you guys so much. And we'll take that on. We'll update it before the next board meeting. So now we're going to do a legislative and regulatory policy update. We have James DeSantos on with us. He is our legislative liaison. I think you might have all had a chance to meet him at our January meeting. And we're excited to have him. He's got a background, in government, in private sector, and we're getting near to the end. So this would be a good time to kind of bring where we are from an energy policy perspective, and specifically the bills that impact the Green Bank. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, James.
All right, thanks, Brian. Good morning, everyone. James DeSantos, the Associate Director of Legislative Affairs. So currently, right now, there's about 3 weeks left in the legislative session, and every single piece of legislation is a work in progress, and they are all being heavily negotiated as we speak. As Brian said, we're talking about 4 bills today, but the Green Bank is tracking probably close to 90 right now, just monitoring, making sure that nothing is added on that is detrimental to our mission. But walking through the 4 high points here is House Bill 6851, which we've discussed previously, is the results of the hydrogen task force, which was chaired by Brian Garcia and run by the Green Bank, and their recommendations, which were raised by the Energy and Technology Committee, and have been going through the process. Right now, it's being negotiated to basically define a definition of clean hydrogen, and that's being negotiated between the Green Bank, DEEP, and industry lobbyists. There's also a very important piece of that bill, which is the community benefit agreement, which adds a 20% scoring bonus for any application that to the federal government, which could significantly help our regional hydrogen hub application. So that's really the impetus for us trying to push this through as quickly as possible. 6764 is in that concerning a solar uniform capacity tax. And what this bill does is it eliminates all references to the property tax on solar arrays, regardless of size, and creates a new uniform tax, which is based on $8,000 per megawatt. What's good about this bill is that it will allow solar to be sited in areas where they typically wouldn't be previously, such as Waterbury with a mill rate of 60 compared to Brooklyn, Connecticut with a mill rate of 20. It makes a big difference in the siting of solar. What we're concerned about is making sure that the legislation is prospective. We don't want this to affect any of our projects retroactively, as it will turn a lot of our projects from the black and immediately into the red. So we have a commitment from the legislature that their intent is to make sure it is prospective. So we're negotiating that, and I believe there's several calls this week on that one, wrapping that one up. Senate Bill 7 is interesting. Senate Bill 7 has been called the aircraft carrier. It is been called the fleet several times. Currently, there's 24 sections. That will probably double by the end of this week, is my guess. Every person out there, every agency is trying to get sections added to this bill of legislation that has died already throughout the session. So that is one to watch. A draft form is expected out by Thursday. So until Thursday, we have very little insight into what is being in there, but it does have some very controversial issues in there for the EDCs, which is the prohibited cost recovery. They're not allowing the EDCs to recover costs for lobbying and for association fees, and they are limiting executive compensation. They're having a PURA do a study on standard service procurement, and they're also probably going to tie in a study into that bill, which will discuss the effectiveness of separating PURA from DEEP. So that'll probably be added to that bill as well. Next slide. So this is the big bill that impacts the Green Bank, and it's very important that everyone knows that this is not a Green Bank initiative, right? So this came about from the Roundtable on Climate and Jobs, and it creates a new program which is going to be administered by the Green Bank. It directs $25 million in general obligation bonds to the Green Bank for staffing up and for energy and solar audits at all of the schools throughout Connecticut, which we estimated to be a little bit over 1,000 of them. The Green Bank will seek federal funds to supplement this, but also will be enabled to issue revenue bonds for the establishment of a revolving loan program to help finance these projects. So we, as I said in the beginning, this is not our initiative, but we are, working very closely with the proponents to make sure that this bill, if it does pass, which it's looking like it may, that the language is completely amenable to the Green Bank and that it's effective in its approach. I don't know, Farnan, if you have anything you want to add to that piece.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess it's nice. It's almost like you're flattered to be offered up as a solution, and you're like, oh my God, this is a huge potential program. And then, obviously the organization that originally created it kind of had like everything under the sun that they could potentially want in there. And we're like, okay, I'm like, well, that's for you to negotiate. But like, as to the things that relate to the Green Bank, for example, the way they originally said that we were going to provide funding, one could have read that like we were going to have to provide hundreds of millions of dollars off our balance sheet. We're like, whoa, like, listen, if this program goes forward, this is going to be through revenue bonds, basically meaning those bonds will be paid back through the revenue from those projects. We can't put our balance sheet at risk for such a huge new program. So it's been a balancing act because we don't own the legislation, but it could be a big component of what we potentially do in the years to come. So we want to make sure that it's done right. And I mean, in full disclosure, it is consistent with our mission. So, it's not a program at the end of the day that if it does get passed, we're like, oh my God, we got to do this. I mean, I can think of a time when we were asked to, in a similar scenario, run a propane tank grant program. We're like, no. Like with this one, you're like, okay, if it does pass, you can see how it would be beneficial to the organization.
Yeah, and to further what Brian said, I mean, initially the bill did, it tied in DAS, it tied in DPH, it tied in DOT with anti-idling and, pickup areas at schools, right? So, I mean, it did eliminate all that and it really streamlined it. A major piece of it is the incorporation of a project labor agreement language into the bill for any project that is over $10 million. They initially it was any project, but they created a trigger of 10 million, which I think really helped the bill. And that's what allowed it to get out of the finance committee. So this bill has gotten out of the finance committee, which I'm shocked.
James,
Yep.
what is that last? It's Tom. My apologies for interrupting.
Yeah.
What does that last provision mean? I don't understand what you just said there, you lost me.
Yeah, so any renovation or new construction of a school facility needs to be zero carbon if the total cost of that initiative is over $10 million, needs to incorporate a project labor agreement.
What is yeah, but I guess where you're missing me, define project labor for me. What does that mean? Project labor agreement.
Yeah.
Union, it's got to be union.
Prevailing wage.
Correct.
Yeah. And
yes.
union labor.
Thank you.
Why does that? Okay, the first thing is, why does that belong in a bill related to carbon free? And secondly, when you say revenue bonds, Mr. Parnan, you're basically just saying that the towns that are building these buildings need to issue more bonds to cover the cost, the incremental cost of making these buildings carbon free. Is that right?
No, I mean, like if we were to pay for the build out of all these projects and to get a bonding set up for that, we would the Green Bank, not the town, not the municipality. So if we were to do it and to own these projects, the revenue stream coming, because we would own these solar systems, for example, that were on all these various schools, and we'd be getting we'd have a power purchase agreement most likely, or some type of fixed lease arrangement. And then we would basically use the revenue from those PPAs from all those municipalities to pay back the bondholders instead of doing like a general that's and then to your second point about the project labor. I mean, I struggle with that personally because the Green Bank has always been kind of agnostic and not favored, labor versus non-union.
Well, that's
This is already the law. It's already the law though. I don't have it right at my fingertips, but for school construction already in the statutes, there is a threshold. I think it's $1 million over which they have to have.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, it's already in the law. This may change the balance a little bit, but I agree. I think, Brian, we have always sort of tried to be agnostic, even when John was pushing otherwise. Did we testify on this bill?
Yes, we did.
So I have a couple of questions. One is, and maybe this is a bigger discussion. I think we need going forward, maybe next session, to have a process by which the board is sort of included or knows what bills we're testifying on, because there are going to be a lot of bills, especially as our mission expands, that ostensibly align with our mission because it's so broad. But just like when you're the CEO of a company buys a major media company, we got to worry about how our attention may be diluted through all the things people want us to be. And I think we also need to be selective and know the lay of the land of things we're testifying on. And I think the board really needs to know this too. And I know the session moves fast, but I would just say, sometime between now and next session, I would like to see a system whereby there's a selection process. I mean, I've done this for years of tracking bills, and I'm happy to work with everybody on how it might work and how it has to be timely. And then two, on this bill in particular, it does seem really great. I do worry a little bit. I mean, there are companies out there, Connecticut companies, that kind of make their bones serving schools with PPAs. And I wonder if, we're going to be crowding them out a little bit. Again, I'm all for us doing more, but, part of our mission is also to make sure the industry as a whole grows. So, that's another reason to be careful and included. Not that we're not careful, but to have a robust discussion is what is the right balance with a bill like this?
Well,
yeah.
Matt, it's Tom. I couldn't agree more with what you're saying. And to add on top of that, having been involved with a town that spent hundreds of $1,000,000 on its schools over the last 20 years, these projects can be very complicated, and I don't know that we fully appreciate the amount of time and attention it's going to require to coordinate this type of effort with these towns building committees. You're dealing with contractors, building committees, town administrations, boards of educations. Then you throw in the Green Bank in there. Then you have the fiscal audit from the state. I mean, this could be a hell of a lot of a time suck here. And again, I'm not saying that it doesn't further our mission, et cetera, et cetera. I get it. But I just wonder whether we're really underestimating what this is going to mean, both as they talk about this at the legislature and then as the Green Bank, because this could be really this could be a lot.
Right. So to your point, yes, it is a lot. It is also a process that is currently underway at the Green Bank through the Solar Map program and the Solar Sat program. So, and Emily Basham and Mackie Dykes have been, phenomenal on outreach and facilitating that process. There is a capitalization in the bill of $25 million, and that is not only to cover the costs of the audits for the energy, but also the solar, but it also, more importantly, provides for the staff up at the Connecticut Green Bank to help facilitate this process.
Yeah, no, it could be, James, thanks for that. And I saw Bert's comments as well. I don't really have the details and the merits, but that could be great. And, for a long time, we were sort of begging to get state buildings and town buildings involved. And I know Mackie and Emily have done a great job with the solar map, and I'm sure there are a ton of lessons learned there. Like in many ways, the Green Bank may know more about this than most places. So, I just think, this is, even with all that, it could be a big undertaking and a very fruitful one.
Yes.
So I just think we need to have a way to, socialize these, just so we have a sense of it. Obviously, the legislature is going to do what they do, but if we are testifying on it, it should be, before we put something out there, I think there's got to be a way to make sure that the board has at least gotten eyes on the concept.
We'll take that as a charge for us, maybe to come back to the ACG committee in the fall to discuss a process for how we'll reach out to you in advance about how we could update and kind of have more of a formal process for how we comment the bills we propose, and the ones that we do not support and the ones that we oppose.
Yeah, it's going to have to be a very, very quick timeline, because you're looking at a 3 to 4 day window sometimes of a notification of a public hearing.
Right. Well, I'm happy to talk offline, James. There's like, we've done this for the CBA and other, sort of institutions, and the trick, I think, is going to be getting as much done early, even though bills can still be proposed. But there's got to be like you said, an expedited process, and people are going to have to be on call for that. Board members, I think, because that's how fast it is. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
That'd be great. Yeah, if you want to talk offline after this, we can try and come up with a process that works for everyone. I mean, I'm happy to update the board however you all see fit.
Yeah, and it's going to take greater coordination too, because like, we're now playing in other people's backyards, whether it's, with environmental sustainability with such a broad mission, we got to make sure that we're aligned. We need to protect our quasi-public status, and at the same time, we need to be aligned with like the overall kind of like state policy goals. So it's going to take a greater level of coordination. It's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not having seen the legislation, we need to make sure that our role here is very clearly defined, and there's no ambiguity as to what the expectations of the Green Bank are relative to these construction projects and the like. I just get concerned because I've seen too many of them go a bit far upfield, and I want to make sure we're protected in that regard.
Yeah.
This is Lonnie. I totally agree. And I mean, I think there are different ways to do sweeps to come after our financial assets. And I think we need to be really clear on what the objectives are and, where the money's coming from.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah, and but before we move on too, I just want to speak very quickly to Matt's point about the industry and their involvement here. Before I was here, I was at Green Skies Renewable Energy for 9 years, and the most lucrative part of that business was the EPC aspect of the construction of the solar array. So those opportunities would still be available to all of Connecticut's companies on all of these projects.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I agree. That's a huge benefit. So.
Okay. All right. And then the last one we have is this was one of those, not pet projects, probably not the appropriate word to use, but like this was a project being proposed by a representative who really wanted to see heat pump dryers clearly being permitted, and they do a lot, and they are a great sustainable appliance, and currently we can finance them under our Smarty program. There's also what we have as the heat loan, which can do it, but there's no specific call out for it in the heat loan program. So when this came forward, there was this legislation that we were not involved in where they wanted to make a specific reference to heat pump dryers to ensure that they could be done. Unfortunately, they made a reference to the wrong financing program. It was basically a defunct program that really the Smarty program is taking on that role. And it's obviously this, what we love about the Smarty program is that you're using community banks, small, local regional banks, and it's all private capital. And as we all know from the headlines right now, those are the banks that are hurting right now. So we're a little concerned that this wrong reference, which made it pretty far to the legislative process, could potentially open up a now defunct program that would potentially compete with the Smarty program. So we're working with Deep, and then the question is, okay, do we just revise this to take this out, basically kill it? That's one option. Which might make the most sense. Or the other option is to potentially shift this into this heating loan program. This heating loan program is run by the utilities, doesn't really have much oversight from Deep, and that I think is a concern of theirs. And we have a concern with this heating loan program because in this higher interest rate environment that we're kind of in, they kind of have this unfair advantage in the fact that they're basically, using utility cost of capital, they can basically they can artificially have a lower interest rate than what's out there in the market, and basically gives them an unfair advantage to compete with the Smarty program. So it's troubling to us, and we just basically need to kind of solve it. So this is something we're working with Deep, and just give you guys a head up on it, because at some point we may want to address it next legislative session.
Okay.
So if no questions on that, we'll move forward. Oh, and then talk a little bit about our, this is we'll call it Matt Rinelli. Someday when we lose you, we're going to change the name to the Rinelli reporting status. So the statutory report status, we are up to date. We're good there. The big news with the board meeting, with the board membership is Laura Hoydick, the mayor of Stratford. She did resign. She had a lot of competing interests with her role as the mayor. I'm really bummed to lose her, but that's a position that we're gonna try to provide some potential suggestions to the Republican House Minority Leader to get that filled as soon as possible. So with that, there's no other questions. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I
Thanks,
second.
everybody, for all the good work.
All right,
Great,
thank you,
thank you.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a
Thanks,
good rest
Tom.
of your day.
Thanks,
Take care,
Lonnie.
guys. Thanks, Brian.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
guys.
Bye all.